Sometimes the most damaging betrayals come from the people who are supposed to protect you, and recognizing when to walk away becomes an act of survival, not spite. I'm a ceramic restorer at a museum, and through my work piecing together ancient pottery fragments, I've learned that some things are too broken to fix. You can see when the structural damage is irreversible, and holding the pieces together is just an illusion. My name is Mark, and after my divorce ended 18 months ago, I never imagined I'd apply this principle to my own family. But that's exactly what happened when my former wife appeared at my door with another man's child, while my parents stood behind her holding a casserole, expecting me to solve the mess they'd helped orchestrate. And when I refused, they launched a campaign to dismantle everything I'd rebuilt. Laura cheated on me with Ryan, a guy from the physical therapy office where she worked as a receptionist, and she left without remorse or apologies, simply stating she needed to explore her emotions, and I should respect her decision before loading her belongings into his truck one Wednesday while I stood watching in my driveway. My parents witnessed this scene, and instead of offering support, they told me to fight for the marriage, with my mother saying relationships are complex, and my father suggesting I consider what pushed her away. And when I pointed out she was literally departing with someone else, they acted like I was overreacting. They maintained contact with Laura throughout the divorce proceedings, and my mother would casually mention her at family meals as if nothing significant had occurred, as if 7 years of marriage hadn't ended with her walking away without hesitation. The divorce settlement split our savings in half. She left me our dog Cooper because Ryan had allergies. Then 6 months later abandoned Cooper at a shelter when Ryan decided to try allergy medication instead. I learned this from a mutual acquaintance, retrieved Cooper, and now he sleeps at the foot of my bed in the modest 1950s house I purchased afterward. A place with creaking hardwood floors where I restore furniture in my garage on weekends while listening to jazz, experiencing genuine peace for the first time in years. Not the manufactured kind you perform at family events, but authentic tranquility, where Saturday mornings arrive without that crushing weight in your chest. I was in my garage last week, refinishing an estate sale wooden stool with jazz playing softly and Cooper dozing in the corner when I heard a car door outside. Unexpected since I rarely have visitors and prefer it that way. So I switched off the sander and moved to the window where I saw Laura on my porch holding hands with a toddler around 3 years old, while my parents' vehicle pulled into my driveway behind them. My mother emerging with a casserole dish like this was a social gathering, and my father adjusting his jacket as if preparing to deliver a prepared speech. Laura appeared gaunt and exhausted, hair in a disheveled ponytail, wearing sweatpants and an oversized hoodie, while the little girl Lily clung to her leg, looking confused about where she was or why she'd been brought there. I opened the door before they could knock and stood silently waiting, and my mother gave me that manipulative smile while raising the casserole and saying I should just listen to what Laura had to say. And Laura explained that Ryan had abandoned them. She'd made errors in judgment, was behind on rent, had lost her employment, and Lily required stability. We'd been happy once I was a decent person. She had nowhere else to turn. My father placed his hand on my shoulder, declaring me reasonable and good, my mother nodding vigorously, adding that I owned a house and was doing well financially so I could provide assistance. And the child stared at me with enormous brown eyes, clearly oblivious to the adult chaos she'd been dragged into. The realization hit me then that they hadn't come seeking forgiveness, but needing a solution. Laura's life had collapsed, and rather than supporting her themselves or allowing her to face the consequences of abandoning her marriage for another man, they decided to make it my responsibility, assuming that because I had property and stable income, and hadn't destroyed my life-chasing feelings. I should absorb the fallout of her choices. My mother wasn't offering a casserole but presenting a bribe. My father wasn't providing support but handing me a script he expected me to follow. Laura wasn't requesting help but positioning me as the backup plan I never consented to become. So I looked at all three of them standing on my porch. Looked at that child who deserved far better than this situation and said one word: no. My mother's expression went blank, my father started speaking, Laura's mouth opened to argue. And I stepped back, closed the door, locked it, returned to the garage, restarted the jazz, and picked up the sander while behind me I could hear them talking, my mother's voice escalating. Laura crying, my father knocking more forcefully, but I remained motionless. They stayed outside perhaps 15 minutes or longer before I heard car doors slamming, engines starting, and the sound of them driving away. And I sat on my workbench looking at Cooper, who'd awakened and was watching me as if awaiting an explanation, realizing my hands had stopped trembling. This wasn't vengeance but protection. Finally recognizing that some people will witness your breaking, and then hand you the fragments as if reassembling them is your obligation. I went inside, opened my laptop, created a document titled Actions and listed: change locks, install security cameras, block all phone numbers, email lawyer, update emergency contacts, revise will. And sitting there reviewing that list, I felt in control of my own life for the first time in years, making choices based on my needs rather than others' expectations. My mother called that night at 9:30 while I was reading in bed with Cooper beside me, and I watched her name illuminate my phone 3 times before voicemail picked up. Then she called again at 10, my father at 10:15, and I watched the notifications accumulate like falling snow. The next morning brought 6 voicemails and 14 text messages, my mother's all using that disappointed tone saying we needed an adult conversation, calling me unreasonable and cruel. My father's shorter, just saying my name and requesting I return his call, but with an unfamiliar edge underneath, something sharp and angry beneath the surface. I screenshot every message, saved every voicemail, placed them all in a laptop folder labeled documentation, then blocked both their numbers, blocked Laura's number, and went to work as if it were any ordinary day. By Thursday, calls came from unrecognized numbers. My Aunt Jennifer leaving a message calling me cruel for turning my back on family when a child needed help. And an unknown woman claiming to be Laura's friend saying I should be ashamed for abandoning a child. But I didn't answer any of them, just kept screenshotting, saving, documenting every contact attempt. At work, my boss Frank pulled me aside during lunch asking if everything was all right at home, saying I seemed distracted, and I told him everything was fine. Just managing some family boundary issues that were handled, and he nodded without pressing further because Frank respects personal privacy. Friday morning at 6:35, while making coffee, I heard a car in my driveway and saw my parents' vehicle. Watched my father exit with a determined stride and try my door handle like he genuinely believed it might be unlocked, my mother standing behind him with her phone ready to call me. And I stood drinking my coffee watching through the window while my father knocked loudly, the kind of knock demanding immediate compliance, and I didn't move. He knocked again, called my name with that sharpened edge. My mother pressed her face against the window trying to see inside. And I remained perfectly still in the kitchen out of their sight, while they spent 15 minutes trying different tactics, calling, knocking, checking the side gate, before finally giving up and leaving. I waited until their car vanished down the street, then called a locksmith for that afternoon, ordered security cameras online with cloud storage and motion alerts for next-day delivery, paying extra for the expedited shipping. Monday morning, I met with my divorce lawyer Mitchell at 9. the type of person who rarely smiles but executes tasks efficiently and thoroughly. And I brought my laptop showing him the documentation folder organized by date and type, and he actually whistled at how meticulously I'd maintained records, saying I don't mess around. And I explained the divorce taught me to document everything, never assuming people will act reasonably or honestly. He reviewed the voicemails, texts, screenshots from unknown numbers, then leaned back with professional satisfaction, declaring this textbook harassment we could absolutely work with. And I paid an $800 retainer and left feeling like I'd just armored myself, finally having someone in my corner who understood the situation. The security cameras arrived Tuesday, and I installed them that evening, small discrete units mounted under the eaves. And Wednesday afternoon, they captured my parents returning while I was at the hardware store buying sandpaper, my phone buzzing with a motion alert. And I watched real time as they approached my porch, knocked, waited, looked confused about why I wasn't answering, then departed completely unaware they were being recorded. And I saved every second to my laptop, adding it to the documentation folder with timestamps and notes. Thursday morning Frank called sounding uncomfortable and apologetic, saying Laura had come to the museum lobby asking for me. And I could hear the unspoken question in his voice about what was happening, so I told him if she returned to call the police. Explaining I had legal representation and this was officially harassment, and after a brief silence he simply said, "Understood," without judgment or questions. I called HR afterward, explained the situation to Helen without unnecessary details, and she added Laura to a restricted visitors list, saying if Laura appeared again security would escort her out immediately, adding that this happens more frequently than people realize, and I felt grateful she didn't demand the full messy history. Friday, I discovered a card wedged in my front door, security footage showing my mother's car arriving at 7 that morning, her exiting alone, looking nervous, tucking something in the doorframe before quickly driving away, and I didn't open it or touch it with bare hands. Using a kitchen towel to carefully remove it and driving straight to Mitchell's office, where he opened it wearing latex gloves like handling criminal evidence. Inside was a handwritten letter from my mother about legacy and forgiveness, and how my grandfather would be ashamed of the man I'd become. Mitchell shook his head, calling it manipulative as hell, saying none of it was about health or family values, but about getting me to respond and break. And he added it to our file saying we were building something solid that would hold up in court if necessary. The following Tuesday afternoon, leaving the museum, I found a woman standing by my car in the parking lot, older, maybe mid-50s, who smiled warmly approaching me and introduced herself as Diane, Laura's mother, wanting to talk parent to parent about what was best for everyone, and I clearly stated I'm not a parent. Unlocked my car and got in without looking at her while she leaned toward my window, saying something about understanding and compassion and how everyone makes mistakes. So I started the engine, looked directly at her, said don't contact me again, drove away and called Mitchell from the car, and he said we were building a strong case for restraining orders if we needed to escalate. That every incident like this strengthened our position. That night my friend Claire texted me. She's Laura's cousin, but we stayed friendly after the divorce because she's always been straightforward, warning me they were planning an intervention and would try to ambush me somewhere. And I thanked her for the heads up, realizing as I sat reading her message in my quiet house with Cooper sleeping on the couch that they weren't done. They were just getting started. Genuinely believing that if they pushed hard enough, I would eventually break and give them what they wanted. The intervention was scheduled for that Saturday at my parents' house. Claire providing details Friday night about how they'd invited extended family claiming I was going through something serious and needed support, even arranging for Laura and Lily to be there, probably assuming someone would convince me to attend if they all ganged up together. But I didn't go, stayed home refinishing the stool in my garage. And around noon Claire sent updates from inside saying everyone was waiting. My mother kept checking her phone and watching the door. Then 20 minutes later that Laura was crying, and my father looked angry while they told everyone I'd changed and become cold. I read the messages, turned off my phone and returned to sanding, not missing the contrast between them sitting in a living room, staging an emotional ambush, while I stood in my garage, doing exactly what I wanted with my Saturday. Sunday morning, I found another envelope taped to my front door. Camera footage showing my mother's car at 7 in the morning, her exiting alone looking nervous, taping something to the door with trembling hands before quickly driving away, and I didn't touch it with bare hands. Used a kitchen towel to carefully remove it, and drove it unopened straight to Mitchell's office, where he opened it wearing gloves. Inside was another long letter from my mother about legacy and forgiveness and family history, and how my grandfather would be ashamed of the man I'd become, how I was destroying the family over pride, and Mitchell called it manipulative as hell, saying the guilt-tripping about my grandfather was textbook emotional manipulation. And we were filing for restraining orders that week. Monday afternoon Frank called me into his office, looking uncomfortable, adjusting his glasses and avoiding eye contact, because my mother had called the museum that morning telling the receptionist I was having a serious mental health crisis and Frank needed to check on me immediately. And I could see him trying to balance employee concern with the obvious strangeness of the situation. So I sat down and explained everything calmly and clearly. The divorce, the boundaries I'd established, the lawyer I'd retained, the documentation of every violation, and Frank listened, nodded, and when I finished looked relieved, saying he was sorry I was dealing with this, and to do what I needed while they supported me. I called Mitchell from the parking lot, told him about the workplace call, heard him typing furiously, and he said that was harassment and potentially defamation. We were filing today. And that same clarity from the first night settled over me again. The temporary restraining orders were granted Wednesday, the judge reviewing our documentation and timeline and signing without much hesitation. And Thursday morning, a process server delivered them to my parents' house. I wasn't there, but Claire heard from family members and texted the details about my father answering, reading the papers, crumpling them up and throwing them on the ground, furious, my mother in tears, both calling me unstable and telling everyone I needed help. But the important thing was they'd been officially served and notified, and any contact from that point forward would be a legal violation with real consequences. Friday afternoon, at the museum finishing restoration work on a Ming Dynasty bowl, security called my extension, saying my parents were in the lobby claiming a family emergency and needing to see me immediately. The guard's voice uncertain, and I could hear my mother's voice escalating in the background. So I told him to call the police immediately. They had active restraining orders, and this was a direct violation. And I remained at my desk while it happened. Frank came by 10 minutes later saying they'd been escorted out by police after claiming my grandmother had fallen and was in the hospital dying. And I said my grandmother died 6 years ago. And Frank just shook his head in disbelief, while the police gave them a warning for trespassing and violating the restraining order. Filing an official incident report, I emailed to Mitchell that night, and he replied, "This helps our case tremendously for permanent orders." The grocery store incident occurred Sunday morning while I was buying coffee and eggs, turning down the cereal aisle, and seeing Laura standing there with Lily in the shopping cart. And she froze when she saw me, her face going completely pale, so I immediately pulled out my phone and started recording video. stating clearly and calmly into the camera that she sees me and needs to leave, making sure to capture her face, the timestamp, the location, everything Mitchell would need. And she grabbed the cart and rushed toward the registers without speaking while I saved the video, labeled it Exhibit C, and sent it to Mitchell before finishing checkout. Tuesday, Mitchell called saying my mother had filed a countermotion claiming I was having a psychological episode, and the restraining orders were based on my mental instability rather than their actual behavior. But he called it a Hail Mary, saying she had no medical records, no evidence, absolutely nothing supporting the claim, and the judge would see through it. With the hearing scheduled for Friday at 2 in the afternoon, and I took the day off to prepare mentally. The courtroom was smaller than expected. Judge Collins, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and reading glasses. And when I entered, I saw my parents on one side with Laura positioned between them, in what looked like a carefully staged united front, designed to make me appear unreasonable. Mitchell presented our case methodically and professionally, showing the timeline from their first porch appearance, the screenshots, voicemails, camera footage, the museum police report, the grocery store video, the letter taped to my door, the workplace calls claiming I was mentally unstable, the manufactured emergency about my grandmother who died 6 years ago, the intervention I never agreed to attend, and Judge Collins listened carefully, took detailed notes. And when Mitchell finished, looked directly at my mother asking if she had medical records supporting her claim that I was psychologically unstable. My mother stammered, said she was just concerned as a mother, that mothers know when something's wrong with their children. And Judge Collins cut her off mid-sentence saying that not liking one's family isn't a mental illness. And I watched my father's face turn bright red as Judge Collins granted permanent restraining orders for 3 years. No direct contact, no indirect contact, no third-party contact. Violations resulting in immediate arrest and criminal charges, and she looked at my parents when stating it, making absolutely certain they understood the seriousness and consequences before dismissing the court. I walked out without looking back. Mitchell shook my hand in the hallway saying I'd done everything right, and I drove home in complete silence. 3 months later, my life looks exactly how I wanted it to look. I go to work, restore ceramics broken for centuries, refinish furniture on weekends, take Cooper camping with my friend Jake when weather permits, updated my emergency contacts at work, removing my parents completely, revised my will to leave everything to charity, specifically arts education programs and a domestic violence shelter, helping people escape toxic family situations. My parents now strangers, Laura someone I used to know in another life. And the peace I have isn't the fake kind I used to pretend existed at family dinners, but something real and solid and mine.